Well, hello there. This is my first time going live on YouTube. I hope everybody's having a really good night tonight. You know, I had this idea several years ago. I'm a homeschool mom. I've been homeschooling for about 25 years, and I decided that I wanted to start reading out loud some of the books that we read in our homeschool because I really enjoy our read aloud time and my kids really enjoy it. And I just started having grandchildren, so I thought this would be a fun way to kind of save some stories for them. So if you're watching me, please say hi. I see a couple people on there. But today we are going to focus on the book called The Little Riders by Margaretha Shemin. And this book is in the Sonlight curriculum. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Sonlight is a literature approach homeschooling curriculum that's really great. We've used it for many years, and we also supplement with a lot of different other things. So I hope you enjoy this. This is in year C. It is approximately third grade. Okay, so thank you so much for listening. This will be chapter 1. First of all, I wanted to kind of show the front of this. You notice what that is? It's a Nazi flag. Here's some soldiers. What's that? It's a windmill. And here we have a tower. That's a clock in the tower. And do you notice the little girl sitting right there? Okay, let's get in it. And here is the first picture. It's the little girl from the inside. Chapter 1. Johanna was sitting on the windowsill in her little attic room, waiting for the clock on the church steeple to strike 12. It was a very warm summer day, and her window was opened wide. From her window, Johanna had the best view of the church steeple in the whole town. That was why it was her favorite spot. Once, when her father was a little boy, he had the same room and had sat on the windowsill, waiting for the clock to strike 12. He had waited for the doors under the church steeple to open, just as Johanna was doing now, and he had counted the 12 little riders as they rode out on their white horses. Johanna always thought of her father at this time of the day as she sat on the windowsill. It had been a long time since she had been home in America with her parents. She couldn't even remember her father very clearly. He was a sea captain, and because he had become very lonesome on his long voyages, he had decided to take Johanna's mother with him on one of them. So he had sent Johanna to Holland to visit her grandparents. She remembered as clearly as if it happened yesterday how she had said goodbye to her father and mother. She had kissed them both and tried very hard to show them a happy face. While her father had held her in his arms, he had said to her, "Thank you very much, my little Johanna, for giving me mother for such a long time. Think of me when you are in my country, and don't forget to give my very special love to the little riders in the church steeple. Help grandfather take care of them, so that when I come with mother to bring you back home, they will ride for us whenever the church clock strikes." Now, Johanna had been in Holland more than 4 years. Soon after she had come to her grandparents, the war in Europe had broken out, and less than a year later, in the early days of May, Holland had been invaded by the German army. For the people of Holland, who had always loved their freedom more than anything else in the world, the presence of the German soldiers was very hard to bear. From her window seat, Johanna looked down over the town. It was an old town with a canal around the center. Behind the canal were the strong fortifications that had once protected the town from enemies that threatened from outside. Her grandparents' house stood at the marketplace, where all the old houses were huddled together, as if they were leaning on each other for support. There were few people in the streets, mostly women and children. It was dangerous these days for men to be out in the streets, since at any time they could be seized and taken far away to work for the Germans. Johanna looked again at the hands of the big clock on the church steeple. Soon it would be 12 o'clock. After the clock had struck 12 times, the little doors under the steeple would open up and out would come the little riders. Grandfather had told Johanna all he knew about the history of the little riders. They were as old as the town, and that was many hundreds of years. They were figures of 12 young noblemen who had gone out as crusaders to the Holy Land and who had never returned to the town. Long ago, an artisan had made the figures out of lead, and ever since they had ridden over the town, sitting proud and erect on their horses. When the air was still trembling with the last stroke of the clock, 6 little riders would come out of each door. They would ride up to each other, lift their swords in a salute, and then go in the opposite door. In and out as many times as the clock had struck. While they rode in and out of the doors, the carillon of the church played old Dutch folk tunes. The music was carried all over town and could be heard in even the farthest street and in every house where the windows were open. Ever since Johanna's grandfather was a young man, he had taken care of the church, and his most important task was to take care of the little riders. He was the only man in the town who understood the complex mechanism that made the little riders ride out over the town every hour, day and night. Johanna helped her grandfather take care of the riders, just as her father had done when he was a small boy, and Johanna loved the little riders just as much as her father did. She always looked up at them wherever she was in town when the hour struck, but she always tried to be in her room where she could see them best when the clock struck 12, because then, of course, they rode the longest. Now the clock was already striking the hour, and the few women and children down on the quiet marketplace looked up at the church steeple to see the little riders. But just when the clock had struck for the 12th time and the little doors opened up to let out the first riders, and when the carillon started to play its music, the gay melodies were drowned out. Toward the marketplace came the sound of oncoming marching. It sounded to Johanna like the rolling of heavy thunder. Those hundreds and hundreds of soldiers' boots, they sounded as if they would trample away the cobblestones of the old marketplace. At the same time, all the soldiers started to sing. Nothing could be heard anymore of the brave little tunes the carillon sent high up into the sky. But the riders kept riding proud and erect on their little horses. And here's a picture. See if you can see that. There's the soldiers marching. Johanna averted her eyes from the marketplace to avoid seeing the soldiers. She closed the window so that she couldn't hear how loud the voices were, but the window didn't keep out the noise. While she watched the riders make their salutes and ride busily in and out the little doors, she could still hear the marching and the singing and the shouting, and she became afraid. She remembered again what she had almost forgotten during her busy morning. How different grandfather had looked to her that morning, and how long it had taken him to walk up the steps to the church steeple. How worried he had seemed as he looked at the riders who were waiting so patiently behind the little doors to ride out. Now the last rider had disappeared, and Johanna slipped from her windowsill. Dinner was at 12 o'clock, and even now, when there wasn't much to eat, grandmother did not allow anybody to be late. She quickly walked down the stairs. There was nobody in the hall, but the door to the small vestibule was closed, and she could hear voices behind it. When Johanna entered the living room where they, like most Dutch families, always had their meals, she saw, to her surprise, that the table hadn't even been set. She went back into the hall to find grandfather and grandmother, but she stopped when she saw them. They were standing at the foot of the stairs, and with them was a German soldier. They spoke in low voices, and Johanna couldn't hear what they were saying. They went upstairs, and all she could hear now was the sound of their footsteps and the opening and closing of doors. The stairs to the attic creaked as they went up to her room. It seemed a long time before they came down again. Grandfather's and grandmother's voices didn't sound low now. They were loud and angry. The German soldier was walking ahead of them. Then Johanna didn't look anymore, and she turned her head away. At the beginning of the war, she had made herself a promise never to look a German soldier in the face because she couldn't bear the sight of them. And since that went by so fast, maybe we'll go on to chapter 2. What do you think? If you would like to take a break, you can always pause it here if you're watching the rerun. But if you would like to hear more of these stories that I'm hoping to do, please be sure to subscribe to my channel, Humble Bee Pie, and hopefully we'll see you here again. But for now, I'm going to keep reading. Chapter 2. Did you see the boat and the fishing pole and the cows? And there's the church. Dinner that day was especially good. Grandfather had gone fishing that morning and had caught a big bass. There were boiled potatoes with fish, and grandmother had picked the first red, ripe strawberries from her garden. But nobody ate much. Everybody was quiet. There was only the tinkling of the knives and forks against the plates. A housefly buzzed against the window screen, trying to fly out into the sun. Outside, there was no sound to be heard. Everybody ate at this hour of the day, and the marketplace was lying lost and forgotten in the hot sunshine. Grandfather put down his knife and fork and pushed his only half-empty plate away. He looked straight at Johanna, and his eyes were filled with pride and love. "There is bad news today, Johanna," he said, "but nothing so bad that we can't bear it. The German soldier you heard talking to us before dinner came to requisition a room in our house for a German officer, a certain Captain Braun. I explained to him that we used all the rooms and didn't have one room to spare. He never listened to me." Grandfather got up from his chair and walked over to the window. He opened the screen a little to let out the fly that had been buzzing desperately. "He took your room," Grandfather continued, and sat down again. "There was nothing I could do about it, although I tried very hard for you." Johanna had to swallow a few times before she could speak. When will he come?" she asked. "Late in the afternoon." It was grandmother who answered. "We'd better finish dinner now. We'll need all afternoon, Johanna, to move your things out of your room. You will sleep on the couch upstairs in grandfather's den." Grandmother took the dishes to the kitchen, and Johanna followed her. She was still too stunned to speak. It had all happened so unexpectedly. It would be dreadful to have somebody she really hated in her own house, in her own room. And Johanna hated the German soldiers. She hated the sound of their boots as they marched, always singing, through the narrow streets of the town. She hated their laughing and their loud shouts of "Hail Hitler!" She hated the soldiers when they posted the big white bulletins out on the corners of the streets, telling of new hostages that they had taken and of many hateful orders given by the German town commander. Most of all, she hated them because they wouldn't let her go back to her father and mother in America. It would also be extremely dangerous, Johanna realized, to have one of them in the house. Johanna knew about the radio hidden in grandfather's den and the weekly meetings grandfather held upstairs. She knew there were many other dangerous secrets that grandfather and grandmother had never told her. All these secrets the house had kept within its walls, and the house had been the only safe place in a world full of enemies and danger. Now the house had been invaded too. All afternoon, Johanna helped grandmother. She took all her clothes out of the attic closet. Now that the closet was empty, she could almost see the cubbyhole hiding all the way at the back of the closet. It had always been Johanna's secret hiding place. She opened the small door that was only big enough for her to crawl through. In the cubbyhole were some of her old toys, her teddy bear that had traveled with her all the way from America to Holland, and some seashells her father had once brought back for her from a far country. She never played with them anymore, but she didn't want to leave them with Captain Braun. Speaking of seashells, we've got a little seashell right here. Now it's carved with an angel on it. When my daughter was born, my husband and I went to a restaurant, and we live on the Oregon coast, and she was about, I don't know, just a few days old, just this little tiny thing, and the waitresses just fell in love with her, and they decided to buy her this. They all pooled their money together and bought her this at the gift store right there at the restaurant. Wasn't that sweet? And that was a long time ago. Okay, where was I? Let's see. She couldn't take the cubbyhole with her, Johanna thought angrily. She hoped that Captain Braun would never discover it. Last of all, she took her books and the pictures of her father and mother and the white house with the shutters where she had lived in America. Now the room was empty. Downstairs, Johanna tried to make grandfather's den look a little like her own room, but it was a small, dark room, and Johanna had never liked it. It smelled old and musty. She didn't even want to put the bright, gay pictures on the wall, although grandfather had made room for them. Her attic room was bright and sunny, but here was only one small window through which the sun never shone. The den looked out on the narrow side street of the marketplace, and right across the street rose the high gray wall of the church. She could see only a small piece of sky if she leaned far enough out of the window, and no matter how far she leaned out, she could never see the little riders up under the belfry. Late in the afternoon, Captain Braun arrived. He rang the bell softly. Grandfather went to open the door for him as grandmother and Johanna stood in the hall. Johanna thought, now he will enter our house, and he will stick out his hand and shout, "Hail Hitler!" And what will grandfather do when he hears those words spoken in his house? But Captain Braun only clicked his heels and made a little bow in the direction of grandmother. She gave him a stiff nod. He stretched out his hand to grandfather. He and grandfather were both tall men and could look each other straight in the face without looking up or down. Grandfather looked at Captain Braun and gave him the same stiff nod that grandmother had given him. He did not take the hand that was stretched out to him. Captain Braun was looking down at Johanna, but she saw only his big, heavy, polished boots and the horrible gray color of his uniform. When he tried to speak a few friendly words to her in broken Dutch, she thought more than ever of the promise she had made herself, never to look a German soldier in the face. She turned her head away from him. For a moment, it seemed that Captain Braun didn't know what to do or say. He clicked his heels again and made another stiff bow in the direction of grandfather and grandmother. "I apologize to you," he said in broken Dutch. "I will try to cause no trouble to you. I wish you all a good evening." Then he turned directly to grandfather. "Would you be kind, sir, and show me the room?" Grandfather didn't speak, but led Captain Braun to the stairs and mounted them quickly. Captain Braun picked up his heavy sack and followed slowly. Johanna could hear the sack bump heavily on every step till it was carried all the way high up to her attic room. Then she heard the door close and Grandfather's footsteps coming downstairs. Johanna went to bed early that night. She had felt tired, but now she couldn't fall asleep. She kept tossing in her new bed. There were strange, unfamiliar shadows on the wall. The big gray wall of the church seemed so near, ready to fall on top of the room. Faintly, she heard the clock strike 10 times. Then the door was opened very softly, and Grandfather came into the room. He sat down in the chair next to Johanna's bed and took her hand in his own. "Why don't you sleep, Johanna?" he asked. "You should try to sleep now. We have all had a hard day and so much has happened." "I hate him," Johanna said, "and I hate this room too. From here I can see only the gray wall of the church. I can't see the riders. I can't even hear the carillon very clearly. How can I ever fall asleep without the little riders? I have always watched them just before I went to sleep. In the morning, the carillon woke me up. Now he has my room that once was Father's room. He has no right to be there. He has no right to sit there and watch the riders and listen to the carillon." Grandfather got up from the chair and walked over to the window. He looked up at the gray wall of the church. "Captain Braun," he said, "will never see the little riders ride out on their horses, and he will never hear the carillon. Today, an ordinance came from the town commander. The riders are not allowed to ride anymore, and the carillon may not play anymore. I just went to the church tower." Grandfather turned away from the window and paced up and down the small room. "All these years I have taken care of the riders so that they could ride when the clock struck the hour. But tonight I closed the little doors." Johanna sat up in her bed, her arms around her thin knees. Her face looked small and white, her eyes big and dark. "Why?" she asked Grandfather. "Why may the little riders not ride out anymore?" "They didn't give us any reasons," Grandfather answered, "but we have seen this coming for a long time. This ordinance is only the beginning. The little riders are made of lead. The Germans need metal, and they may throw them into a melting pot to make munition out of them for their armies. Everywhere the occupied countries are being plundered, their treasures taken away, and the bells of their churches melted down to be made into weapons. Grandmother and I have often talked of what to do if this ever threatened to happen to the little riders." Grandfather patted Johanna's hand gently. "We will have to hide the riders, Johanna, if we want to keep them from the town. Go to sleep now. There is much to be done tomorrow. If we want to keep them for the town, not from the town." Do you guys like this story so far? I hope you do. I'm going to get a little drink here. Okay. Grandfather tucked the blanket around Johanna and left the room, but Johanna didn't want to sleep. She wanted to think about everything Grandfather had told her. The night was cool and quiet. From somewhere she heard the sound of a flute. At first, she thought it must come from outside. She pushed her blanket away and stepped out of her bed to look out of the small window. But she saw only the dark street and the high gray wall of the church across it, and she didn't hear a sound. She walked across the room and opened the door to the hall. The sound came from the top of the house. Barefoot, Johanna climbed silently up the attic stairs. Halfway up, she could see her room. Captain Braun had left the door open so that the cool night wind could blow through the warm room. He was sitting on Johanna's windowsill. His back was turned to the door, his long legs dangling out of the window, and he played his flute over the silent marketplace. Johanna didn't watch him for long. She went downstairs without making a noise. She didn't close her door with a bang, but she closed it very firmly. When she was back in bed, she pulled the covers over her ears so that she couldn't hear a sound that could keep her awake. But it was a long time before she fell asleep. All right, that is the end of chapter 2. Well, I hope you will join me next time, and I might surprise you and do it live, or I might upload a video, but either way, I would love to have your comments and for you to subscribe, and pretty soon we'll get through this small book. It has 76 pages. So I hope to join you and get through it all together. Please let me know what you think. Thanks and have a great night. Bye-bye.